Hello and welcome to Console Shock Retro Modern Gaming Chat, episode 63, with me, Trev, and the former and still alive co-owner of the best retro game shop.
Well, yeah, the former co-owner of the retro shop, PlayNation Games.
Don't say anything, I haven't introduced you yet. Well, kind of in the middle of it. You jumped all over that, mate.
So
what the hell? What the hell? Oh, yeah, so,
Sorry.
but yeah, Stu. Yeah, hi, Stu, yeah, alright, you're right. Yeah, you can talk now.
Hi everyone.
Cool, there we go. There he is, so yeah. How's it feel to not co-own a video game shop?
It's been about a year and a half since I stopped co-owning it.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah, it's. Do you know what? It feels...
Good.
I really don't miss it, actually. And
the admin side, obviously, you know, customers wicked and all that stuff, aren't they? Yeah, definitely. But yeah, admin. And you have a job. You were doing two jobs, effectively.
I was, yes. I was working there at weekends.
Yeah.
And maybe a few evenings a week doing paperwork and maybe helping with events and stuff. And then Monday to Friday doing a full-time job. And, you know, a lot of people always say, I watch a lot of people on YouTube. They go, "Oh, you know, you've got to have a side hustle. You got to be doing your job. And doing something else, and doing this." And I find that
bullshit.
Yeah, you know, this is kind of sort of my side hustle. Though we talked about it before, we don't make any money out of it, but I certainly enjoy doing it.
Well, we need to get one of those guys that make bollock shavers. They seem to have taken over all the sponsorship, haven't they?
Have they? I heard that on a podcast the other day, and I was like,
Manscaped. Hey, Manscaped guys, yeah, we'll sponsor us. We love balls, shaving balls. We can totally.
I think they've got an advert from us for free.
Oh yeah, damn.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe they'll pay us retrospectively.
Money, yeah.
Use the promo code Console Shock,
so
and you get 50% off.
It's almost like Console Cock could be good, like reference, couldn't it? With balls and the old genitalia. Anyway, let's not talk about that stuff. What we were talking about was you had basically 3 jobs because you are also a professional, well, not really professional, but amateur YouTuber, sort of stars. And obviously, you know, there's stress with that, and there's your shop, and then you're actually
my 9-to-5 job. But you find that sometimes it can. Obviously, I was passionate about the shop, but it did take over. You know, I'll be doing stuff that when I was at my other job, that I'll be worrying about things for the shop, and you'd
be doing texting people, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. And in reality, it's you've got to sort of focus on your main job, or make the shop your main source of income. And I never want to go down that route. I always want anyway. You know, that's it was difficult, but I much prefer it now. Having always had my weekends off, I can, I'm doing well in my job. I'm very much enjoying it, and but in a different way to how I enjoyed sort of working in the computer game shop. But unfortunately, actually, there was a documentary that's come out all sort of focused on American video game shops, like independent ones, and I've seen trailers for it and things, but it's just how the video game industry is changing. A lot of people buy the video games online now.
I do really. I can't remember the last time I bought one. Well, apart from CEX and that second-hand stuff.
Yeah, and I love going to CEX, but it's rare that I actually go to an independent video games, because there's just not one near me.
Yeah, there isn't any.
There's not go to.
In London. Yeah.
You know, and I think there's one in Tooting, one up in Romford.
I think I live in
obviously PlayNation Games, and
there's one in South East.
In Brixton, one in Brixton as well.
Yeah.
So it's just difficult to run them. It is believe it or not, it's actually hard to make profit out of there, and I don't want to get into business rates.
CEX is probably killing the retro gaming bit a little bit, because they've kind of sucked that in as well now.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them, you don't really see that much retro in them. They don't always sort of do it that well. Some do, some
don't. They don't cover the whole lot as well, do they? You're not going to find they're not going to do Amiga or like Atari ST or Commodore.
No, and they don't. I don't think they display it well enough. It's never out on the shelves for you to pick up, and a lot of the games you just can't see the price in.
I don't know why that is. I think they just don't really. Well, one, they obviously they're loose games a lot of the time, aren't they? So they can't really just have them on a gondola. Because someone just pick it up and walk out with it, unlike a sort of a 360 game, which they could just keep the case out there. So I guess there's that element of it. I mean, thinking about your store, I don't really. I guess you kind of did that to a degree, but then you'd have the big Amiga games just out and Commodore.
Yeah, well, I mean, they fingers crossed never really got stolen, but
yeah.
It's just how what I'm trying to say is that the video game industry is changing, and unfortunately, it's for the worse because quite often if you want to buy a game, for example, for £45, if you buy it from Game or CX or PlayNation, it's £45, and then you get a physical item, but if you buy that game off an online store, okay. Potentially, it will take a long time for it to download first off. But then, if you complete that game after maybe 10 hours, or actually you've played that, you don't want to play it anymore, you can't sell that product.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So
margins.
It's actually kind of the games almost cost you twice as much as what they did before. And okay, you can't sell it to a shop, but you could potentially sell it to a friend of yours. You can put it on a Facebook group and go, oh, I've completed the new Call of Duty. I've done Borderlands 3 now. It cost me £40. It's been out 2 weeks. Hey, I could sell it for £30, to someone. And then someone go, hey, yeah, I want to pay that. I'll buy it for £30. And it can move on rather. And I just think it's rather sort of disingenuous, and maybe I'd almost like to see some sort of, especially on the PlayStation and the Xbox and Nintendo as well, is some sort of competition, as in that you can actually buy the games maybe from 2 or 3 different stores actually on an Xbox, and then download it to that Xbox. So then you might have someone that would sell the game a little bit cheaper or things like that. It just seems...
Yeah, you've basically got a lot on the PC. You've got Steam Store, you've got Origin, you've got
Origin, you've got good old GOG.
Yeah,
what was it? Epic Store now. You can buy codes from Amazon, and then you've got the other side of things, which is a little bit dubious legally, where you can buy CD keys from like the Eastern European markets. So actually, it makes PC gaming sort of a hell of a lot cheaper. But obviously, PCs arguably cost more than what a console does, and there's a little bit of difficulty of getting into PC gaming because you've got to be an expert on, not an expert, but you've got to know, I've got the right specs and things like that. And I much prefer gaming on a console, but it always frustrates me how, if you turn on your PlayStation, you turn it on your Xbox, there's one place you can buy the games from, and that is the official store. And okay, yeah, they do have sales every now and again, but you can't trade your games in. You don't have a choice of anywhere else to buy them from, and so on. So it is a little bit frustrating.
Yeah. Well, it's not going to get any better, is it? Unfortunately. But in terms of one way. We're going to lead into our subject of the day. Talking of, running a shop, and also you had your own shop. So we're going to talk about the second generation of video game consoles. So it's an interesting subject for us, and a bit of a disclaimer as well right now. Neither of us are sort of, we don't have a lot of first-hand experience with these things.
No.
And also they were a little bit before, literally, some of these came out before either of us were born. So we were kind of, we were only like either toddlers or just born as many of these consoles were coming out. So we were way too young to really have any kind of a, to be asking them for Christmas or for them to be the current, systems. And also UK gaming history is a bit different to the US, where the second generation of game consoles were the main focus of their video game history. Whereas over here, that early 80s, so what we mean in terms of time span, sort of, 1970, I think when, let's say, the real point it begins is literally when the Atari 2600 was released, or the VCS, so 1977.
That's right, yeah.
To about, I would say, 85, shall we say, when the NES came out. But obviously here we had Amiga, and before that.
But before that, I think we went down the route of the micros. So we had, of course, the Spectrum, the Acorn Atom, that sort of market, and the Ataris. I say the VCS 2600 that did come out in the UK, and
it did,
but it was.
I think it kind of we sort of from what I understand of video game history, from what I've learned over the years on UK game history, the 2600 was a huge success in the UK, but then people kind of migrated from that over to the ZX Spectrum or the Commodore. So perhaps some of those later consoles, maybe the Intellivision and the Coleco, will go through the sort of the list that we're going to sort of talk about. I think people tended to migrate from the Atari to the Spectrum. So I'm sure if you spoke to people sort of probably in their mid-40s now, that would have been sort of 9, 10, 11 years old around the time the VCS came around, there'll be a typical narrative of, I got a VCS. That was, when I was 8th or 9th Christmas, my birthday when I was 8 or 9th, or for Christmas when I was 8 or 9 years old. And then, the ZX Spectrum came out 2 or 3 years later, and I chucked the 2600, went up in the loft, started, and that was completely went down the route of home computers. And it probably
for me,
I
mean, looking at, I think the biggest thing was, it comes back to what we were initially saying about, pricing of games. And I remember I wanted to get a Spectrum because, you went into Boots and the games were $2.99 each. And I can't imagine a video game cartridge for the VCS. I haven't actually got it in front of me, but I'm guessing they were £15-20 each.
It'd probably be in line with what you'd pay these days for a game. Probably slightly more expensive as well, actually.
Yeah. So to me, it was like, oh wow, you can get all these great games, and I don't know, they cost $2.99 on cassette. And to me, that was like, oh yeah, now we're talking. That's brilliant. I don't buy a cartridge that's might be, I don't know, £20 or £10 or basically a lot more than what a cassette would cost.
Yeah, exactly. So the market never really had a chance to develop and mature. Whereas the computers that they had in the US was things like the Apple II and probably the Commodore 64 obviously was there as well, but they were a lot more expensive to get the sort of the base unit than sort of $100 console. And little kids wouldn't necessarily, their parents wouldn't get them an Apple II, and they probably, a lot of that they would have had in probably school, so they were kind of covered for the computing side, and then they'd go home and play their, Coleco or their Atari. But in terms of like retail, there's an interesting point about how these things developed in the UK. Did you see a lot of sort of second generation console? Sort of the actual consoles themselves and the games? Did you see them a lot in play?
No, I mean, my first experience of sort of back in the day was, I remember I had a neighbour and he had an Atari VCS. It was actually the junior one, so the 2600 Junior.
They look really cool, yeah, the sort of wedge-shaped one, yeah.
Yeah, it was very small. He had one of those, and I remember playing that, and I was just like, and I had no... I really just didn't like it. It was, hold on, this is not very good. This is like a really bad version of, and I was sort of playing Spectrum games, or I'd seen maybe the things like the NES at that point, and they were just like, oh wow, that looks amazing. But these games they look just so. It was something you sort of saw at a boot fair, was, the Pong machines and, you saw Pong machines for £1 or something, and it was like they looked really good because they had loads of buttons. They all said, "Oh, they got 50 games on," and then you bought one with your pocket money, and it was literally it was such a basic game, and you kind of felt very let down by it. And so that's, I mean, what I think, Trevor, you were alluding to earlier was with all these Ataris and things like that. I've never had I really wanted to get an Atari because it was not something that was in my consciousness when I was sort of much younger. I never thought, went into a shop and thought, when I saved up all my money, when I got Christmas money, I want to buy one of those. That was never my I don't know, sort of aim really. It was always sort of machines after that, which to me sort of looks so much better. And I know you mentioned before the podcast that you're kind of getting into collecting for, I'm going to say the Atari, but you didn't really mention which one you were collecting for.
Yeah, what kind of prompted this whole, subject matter for the show today is basically I've sort of, just started to take an interest in that generation of consoles, and my stories are very much like yours, Stu. I mean, I was too young to have been around when these were, the mainline consoles of the time. I didn't really become aware of video games or start getting into video games until sort of around 1991, when I was sort of 8 years old, 7, 8 years old. So that might be a couple of years later than most people, I probably think. But my first experience with anything was a Commodore 64. So 8-bit is really where I sort of jumped in, or that sort of, which is almost like later generation 8-bit. It kind of really. When we got to that NES level of graphics, really, when there was character sprites that looked like people, and then I think I became aware that there was things before that. You kind of, I always knew there was things before that, I think, intuitively, because things have earlier things of things, if that makes sense. But
things have earlier things of things.
Yeah. I was saying that 10 times drunk. But yeah, it was like, and then I think, when I sort of learned about history and reading the magazines of the time, people would allude to earlier consoles, and you'd be like, oh, there was that. That's what they were called then. And I think the big one for me was, and I've mentioned this book before, but I got in the sort of Christmas '96 issue of Computer and Video Games. There was an awesome booklet that came free with it. That was the complete history of video games. And that kind of blew my mind, this little booklet. It was probably about 100-ish pages big. It came with it. It was really good. It wasn't it was really high quality printed for a freebie that they gave away with the magazine. It had a silver foil cover with a Space Invader pixel art graphic as the front sort of icon, a sprite from Space Invaders. I think it was written by the Computer and Video Games people. They probably spent months doing it, knowing they'd get it ready for Christmas. And I absolutely went berserk reading. I think I read it cover to cover not long after I got that issue. Because there was stuff in there pre-1991, I guess. I didn't know. The oldest thing I probably knew at that point was the Commodore 64. And I think I knew there was a Spectrum. I think I had a mate that had one of those. I seem to recall playing that. And also knew about the NES, which is obviously originated back to the 90s. Basically, the ones that were still active around that time, I would know about well, because they were still being covered in the magazines and they'd be in the shop still and all that stuff. But things like the Atari 2600, the Intellivision, the ColecoVision, the 5200, the 7800. I didn't know anything about these at all until reading this book, and they were interesting to me, but I never had any desire to buy them, because to me there was why would I want to play a game of one block shooting a line at another block, because that was as complex as those games were, right? The bare minimum for me was a NES game, or a Commodore 64 game, and that's in light years ahead of anything those old things made. So I had no appreciation of them at all, and it wouldn't have been. Yeah, go on.
I was going to say, I mean, the games at those time, they're all called the whole sort of taglines. Oh, bring the arcade home, and so the whole idea was that I think with what you're saying with the Commodore 64, with the Spectrum, you kind of got actually games where they weren't based on arcade games. You could get, you know, football managing games. You could get all, you know, adventure games. You get ones, you know, role playing games. You know, text adventures. You got this whole, you know, raft of games. Whereas on the Atari, I can mention the Atari VCS, the 2600. On that, it seemed to be sort of Pac-Man, or it seemed to be very arcade focused,
quite
games.
Abstract sort of concepts as well, you know.
Yeah, and because they were sort of arcade games, it was they all had very sort of, to me, it was all about sort of twitch reactions or fast reactions of just playing a little game for, you know, 5 or 10 minutes, and it was kind of like the same type of experience you got in an arcade. You know, you put in your 20 pence, and you know, you got to play a game for, I don't know, 2 minutes or something, however long you stayed alive for. So to me, that type of game, I think, actually was very, it just didn't seem to have that much depth to
or
it.
Appeal,
or appeal. And it wasn't until much later that actually, you know, they could really start doing arcade games properly. But I'd still say to the day, you know, arcade games is, I do enjoy playing them, but then they are designed, you know, to give you 3 lives and make you put in another, you know, 50 pence, 20 pence to carry on playing it. Well, I'd much rather sit down and play maybe a different style of game over a longer period. And
yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously, with something like a NES game, or, you know, a lot of Amiga and Commodore 64 and Spectrum, the games had a story, and you would go from level to level to progress through the story, and there'd be an ending. There'd be, you know, and you'd be playing a character, a man or a woman or whatever, taking them through this story to the end over several hours, sometimes like an RPG, like it's Legend of Zelda or something. Whereas, you know, your Atari, again, we're going to keep saying Atari products, it's kind of the most iconic of that generation. It was basically, you are spaceship blowing up blocks, and that's, you just keep doing that, you know, until you've got a huge score. There wasn't really an end. Sometimes there was an end. And sometimes the end will just take you back to the beginning of the game with harder difficulty. And it was things like controllers were weird, like you had things with dials on. And when I would see those, I'd be like, really? How would that work? Like paddle controllers. Things would have like a mobile, like a phone. It'll have a keypad on it and a weird disc. And you'd be like, how the hell were these things controlled?
Exactly. How people design those and thought, oh yeah, this will work. This is even the Atari VCS. You know, it's got the little joystick with sort of one button in the corner, and so you're kind of
iconic in itself.
You're almost holding it completely the wrong way round, because usually you'll use the direction with your left hand and then the action button with your right hand. But when you use that, it's the opposite way round. And what I've always is sort of frustrated me is, maybe I've thought, I'll download an emulator for it, but then hold on, I haven't got the silly little controller, or I haven't got the dial to play Breakout, or and it's just never been a really sort of pleasurable experience, because I never really played it sort of when I was younger to go, I've got fond memories of playing. I had a great afternoon playing Breakout, or, you know, Pac-Man, or Adventure, or something, you know, at my friend's house. I love to recreate that. I just remember the games. It just felt odd. You put them on and you press the on button and the game had started. And it was sort of like, to control it, you had like 6 buttons on the top, which you could change the level and you could change the color, and you always had to tune it was just, I don't know, but
I mean,
I wasn't a fan of it.
It's like a good point you were saying about how there isn't even title screens a lot of the time. You just plug the cartridge in, put the power on, bang, you're already, you know, the spaceship is ready to go. But I find now, as I've gotten older, and I'm, you know, able to, and also watch a lot more YouTube videos about these consoles that have made them, you know, seeing what the real range of stuff that they could do, and that's maybe I kind of admire them. And also, another aspect of getting older is the amount of time we have to play these games now. Weirdly, now, those games where you could just dive in and play 20 minutes, half an hour, sometimes less, sometimes a bit more. These consoles are built around those experiences. And those experiences have now come back, I think, because mobile phone games and like handheld games are now like that. Very short bursts. Obviously, we don't pay 30 quid for them, now like you might have done in 1980 for a cartridge that had that experience. But now I think those sort of types of games have actually come back. So the default isn't a game where you have to be platforming, in through a story for 8 hours. Sometimes it is catapulting a bird into a bunch of pigs. And that's it, and that's, obviously that can something that could drag out for many hours, but so can, Space Invaders, really. But if we go into like the sort of the details of the second generation, so I've already talked about the Atari 2600, but there were other systems that came up around that time. So another one is the Intellivision. We're not going to go through every single one. There's variations of a lot of them. We're looking at the big guns here.
We only talk about the big guns on this show.
We try and only talk about the big guns. This is where the big guns play. So we've got the Intellivision is another one, and that was kind of the first console to kind of rival the Atari 2600, made by Mattel, who are obviously more famous for, I think, Barbie and He-Man toys. They made a games console called the Intellivision, came out in 1979. And then you had the ColecoVision, which was kind of quite a big leap in sort of graphical prowess. It was marketed as a console that was the closest to recreating what was in the arcades at that point in time, like Donkey Kong and games like that were graphically very advanced for the time. And around the same time as the ColecoVision, obviously Atari were realizing that it was a thing that you kind of had to bring out newer versions of a console that had better hardware so people will buy them. It won't work like a VCR where you'll just keep it for 20 years until it breaks. The nature of computer games, they do advance, especially with the arcades at the time. Every year there'd be new hardware that would be more difficult for the consoles to keep up with. And when they saw like the ColecoVision particularly coming out, they thought, holy crap, we need something that can kind of keep us in line with the higher level of graphics that can pump out. So they brought out the Atari 5200, which didn't actually come out in the UK. But that was a kind of, it was, I guess, almost like a mid-generation refresh, but it wasn't compatible with the 2600. But it was a much more powerful machine that was more in line with the ColecoVision. Probably runs about neck and neck with it in terms of power. But it was a bit of a failure for numerous reasons, which we could go into later. So they're kind of the systems that we're going to focus on. And
what about the Vectrex?
Oh yes, of course. So Stu, you're interested in the Vectrex?
Well, actually, the Vectrex
is you like
that was something that you look at that now, and if as a Vectrex in front of me, there isn't a Vectrex, but if there was a Vectrex in front of me, it actually looks extremely impressive still today. Certainly can't say that about any of the other machines. But the Vectrex is basically, it's the one where it comes with its own screen that's built in. And
it's
the whole
like
idea
is tabletop arcade almost, isn't it?
Yeah. So a lot of the games actually did look like an arcade game, and it was a black and white screen, but all the games were, what's it called, wireframe or
vectors?
Yeah, vector.
It's
so
in the
it was
name.
all I should have guessed that. Vector graphics. So the actual what was it called? Asteroid, or their version of Asteroids. Called Space Attack or something like that. Looked just like sort of the arcade version. So there was lots of games which were, space games, and I actually think of that generation, it was the best machine, just because it could sort of, I wouldn't say it could do a lot, but what it could do, it actually excelled at and made for sort of quite fun games. And if I had a sort of a magic wand and one would appear in front of me, I think I'd go for the Vectrex. But I think only about 30 games came out for it, and if you're a collector of it, it's quite good because you can get a cartridge with all 30 games on. And
that's right,
And so I know a lot of people who have bought a Vectrex, actually mainly from me back in PlayNation Games time, but they bought the Vectrex and then they went online and brought the multi-cart, popped that in the side, and then they've got access to like all 30 games and then a few homebrews that have been done sort of recently.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's aged a bit better than the other systems because it's got a fairly straightforward joystick with buttons, controller. It's all in one unit. You haven't got to like find a CRT or work out a way to get your TV to work with it. It's all built in. So in that way, it's kind of, a lot more easy to use in current times. Obviously, it's got a working unit. Whereas if you go back to the other systems, the 2600, 5200, Intellivision and Coleco, they're all completely RF based. There's not even composite video at this point.
No.
So you got to obviously have a TV that can handle RF. And to be fair, until you get to I would probably say post 2012 TVs where they really started cutting out the analog. Although my 2015 LG still has an analog input, so a 2600 would work on that. You might struggle a little bit to connect them to modern TVs.
Case of you might be able to connect it, but it'll just look awful. So you've really got to go down the route of actually getting an old TV, and then I think it'll look quite good.
Yeah, I mean, there's the argument of, well, it was only ever supposed to be seen through RF, but obviously, that may be true and may be false, but to be honest, you're going to struggle to connect it just because the TVs have changed now. They don't allow analog inputs. So you might have an antenna connector in the back of your TV that looks like your ColecoVision cable will plug into that, but it won't be able to pick up the analog signal that the Coleco or Atari is spitting out. So you'd have to either composite or RGB mod them, which you can do, or you might have to try and find someone that can sell you one that's already been done. They do float around on eBay.
Do you know what I'd recommend, Trev? If you want to go for an Atari VCS, it's actually go for one of those Atari flashbacks.
There's another option.
You get those, and they've got AV out on them. I think the Atari Flashback 3 has sort of an FPGA chip on there or a system on a chip, and it's actually a pretty good sort of version of it. Okay, it's probably not going to be quite the same as having the real hardware, which regular listeners will know that I'm always get the original TV, get the original hardware. That's the way to go. Emulation's never quite right, but I think it's just I almost want to say that you probably get a better experience from using one of those Atari flashbacks. They're 30 quid, and you get 40 games with it. A lot of the classics are on there. That's the route I would go if I wanted to play the Atari VCS again.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you are or through emulation, if you can deal with sort of the funky controllers that a lot of these consoles had. If you're not too bothered about owning the hardware, that would be the way to go. Just because it's the easiest way to get something to be able to play these games in modern times. But if you like us, and we do like to have the original hardware, obviously you would need to. There are many variants of all the consoles, and there are some issues with some of them as well. Obviously, for all of them, there's issues with the video signal. So you may have a TV already that can accept RF, so you'll be able to get them working. Obviously, it won't look brilliant. Obviously, the graphics aren't especially complicated anyway. This is pre-NES. Pre-Commodore 64 and Sinclair in some cases. So obviously very blocky kind of stuff. You have to use your imagination. But there are mods available. But in terms of the consoles, I mean, obviously the 2600 is kind of the baseline in terms of power. Then the Intellivision is a little bit, is actually a more powerful system. It's kind of actually, weirdly enough, its main CPU is actually 16-bit. Which is crazy.
It really?
It's technically the first 16-bit console. But
you're full of facts, aren't you?
Yeah, well, so is Wikipedia. It's got this crazy 16-bit CPU, but obviously it's a very primitive 16-bit, and the surrounding hardware is a big bottleneck. Don't expect, Street Fighter 2 or anything. But often you'll find, games that are on the 2600. There's probably most of the famous 2600 games. So we're talking things like, Space Invaders, Asteroids, things like Air Raid, Pitfall, Hero, Donkey Kong, all those sort of games that are on the 2600. They'll be on the Intellivision, but they'll look a bit better. And also, the Intellivision often there's actually music, and it has kind of a fairly sort of, I would say, almost Master System sounding sort of music. Although it doesn't always play those in the background when you're playing the game. Often it's just the sound effects, because that's pretty much how games were in those days. It was just the sound effects. There wouldn't be a soundtrack playing in the background. But you might find with something like the Intellivision, it's got a bit of a funky controller. Whereas we already talked about the Atari 2600, where it's basically, for the most part, it's the joystick. You've got the joystick with the one button, which most people can pretty much pick up and use straight away, which is, obviously, it's a little bit different to what we're used to with the positioning of your hands, but it's pretty intuitive. And even like the paddle controllers, which you tend to use, where it's a dial that you turn left and right, those sort of games like Breakout and Pong and Space Invaders, where you're just sliding your character or spaceship along a single plane, they're actually quite intuitive as well.
I think that they are. I remember having it in the shop and the television came in, so we managed to set it all up. We popped a game in, and it was just like we just couldn't work how to control it.
Exactly, yeah.
It was just very. It wasn't a joystick, and it was some sort of dial. And did you press on the dial? Did you turn the dial? And then it sort of had a telephone keypad on. And it was all wired into the machine.
It sounds like an Intellivision, yeah.
Yeah, no, it was definitely in the television. Yeah. And it was wired into the machine, and it was just like, oh, okay, it's just not fun. Okay, well, it works, right? Let's put it up for sale.
That's the problem with, that is the criticism of the Intellivision. The control, I mean, you've got the better graphics, so you've got more advanced versions of games that you're familiar with, perhaps already from the Atari. And it's got some of its own unique games. But the controller it's really funny, because I watched a YouTube video today where this dude on YouTube was comparing the Atari 2600 to the Intellivision. And in the final battle, he sort of said the Atari 2600 actually won, despite the fact the graphics weren't as good in the games, even in the games that are on both systems. The controller, because it was so much easier to control the games, it won because of that. Whereas the Intellivision has a very sort of abstract, again, we're coming at it as people that didn't grow up with this stuff. It's almost like the N64 for us, whereas a lot of people now hate the controller, or people that only ever had a PlayStation and have an N64 hate the controller, whereas people like me and you that are, fans of the N64, I think
it's a great controller.
I'm fine with the N64 controller. I could play it now, and I'm absolutely fine with playing GoldenEye. I just dive straight in. It's Superstar Soccer, Conker's Bad Fur Day, Banjo-Kazooie, Mario Kart. I'm absolutely fine. I don't like the Retro Fighters controller or anything like that. It's cool.
I've got the Retro Fighters one, and that is an improvement. Yeah, but that's only because the original N64 one, the analog stick is very weak.
Yeah,
and it can,
for someone that hasn't got that muscle memory of from years ago, I would always say, you're probably better off having a Retro Fighters. But for me, it's just ingrained into my DNA, the sort of Trident controller. So we have that same experience with Intellivision, where it's got a very bizarre dial at the bottom, dial that's also a button you can push in, and a keypad. The games came with overlays that you put over the keypad, so you have to rely on those still being in the box of the game if you've even got the box. Otherwise, you've just got to mash the buttons. And again,
work out which one does what. And
you're in an era where the games are fairly abstract, some of them. If they're more complex than just spaceship shoot at thing, you might struggle a little bit to work out what everything does. It's probably better in a better time now than you would have been in the mid-90s, perhaps, when you picked up this in a garage sale, because you could just look it up on the internet now, and you can maybe print out an overlay, and there's probably repros of that stuff. But the thing with the Intellivision is it does die a little bit on the controller if you're not used to that controller.
Yeah.
Now, the one that I think is the one to go for if you're thinking of going into the second generation of gaming, thinking, what is the console that I should go for? I actually think the ColecoVision is the best console.
Because that's got a joystick, hasn't it?
Yeah, so you've got a kind of a combination of the VCS controller 2600 and the Intellivision. You've got the joystick. It's still not a brilliant joystick, but it's a joystick, and you've got the keypad. But it's the great thing about it is you can unplug the controllers. So you mentioned that the Intellivision,
revolutionary.
It sounds ridiculous, right? But the Intellivision, they're built into the unit. Now, there's a caveat. The Intellivision, there was an updated version called the Intellivision 2, where you could unplug the controllers, but that's not as common as the original unit.
No.
So you can unplug the ColecoVision controllers if you absolutely hate them and plug in a Mega Drive controller, and it'll work. You might miss some of the keys, but if you have the second controller in, you can use the keypad on that most of the time.
Do you know what I suggest for the best second generation computer to buy? It's actually
ColecoVision Flashback.
I wasn't going to say that, but it's a good point. I was actually going to suggest getting a third generation machine and getting the 7800 because, and I'll tell you two reasons. For one, it plays the 2600 games.
It does.
So, okay, that's a good reason. It's a newer machine, sort of.
Adapter as well. They just plug straight in the cartridge slot.
Yeah. What's that? Sorry.
The 2600 games. There's no adapters needed. Just
just plug them in and away you go. But the second reason, it actually comes with a 2-button controller, which looks like the NES controller.
In the UK, it did. Yeah. In the US.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know in the US. So it came with a really nice little sort of controller. I think now it's obviously very ergonomically not great, and it had a little sort of thumbstick on there. But so I thought actually I'd buy that one because you can play the 7800 games, which look maybe as good as the NES sort of. Plus you can play all of the 2600 games on there as well, and in my opinion, with a better controller.
So it's very good advice. The only thing, there's a couple of things with that. The Atari 7800 is RF only again. Yeah. So you're stuck there. I think it's the only third generation console that's RF only. So again,
I've actually done a survey. I think you find that 95% of our listeners actually own a CRT TV, and they know how to tune in,
solder an RGB mod,
or tune in and get it modded.
Yeah. So, but that, there's an issue there. God, it's got awful. Well, basically, they didn't put any extra sound chip in the Atari.
No, it's got the same sound chip from 1977.
Yeah,
it came out in, I don't know, maybe 86 or something, 86, 87.
Yeah, exactly. So the Master System and then the NES dump all over it, basically.
Of course, they are better. But the point is, in my opinion, that's a good way to play the 2600 games.
It is indeed, yes. And you got if you're in the UK, you'll get a decent joypad with it as well. But a great thing about the ColecoVision, you can actually buy. They made, and this is a crazy thing to think about when it happened in 1982. Coleco. Now, Coleco are actually more famous for making the Cabbage Patch dolls, Cabbage Patch Kids. They also made electronics and some arcade games and Pong.
Weren't they famous, Coleco? There was some sort of leather.
Yeah, that's right. That was what they started off doing. I think it was.
There was something like a Coleco stands for something like Colorado Leather Company.
Yeah. That's right.
I made that up, but it's something like that.
So it's Connecticut leather company.
Oh, is it? Yeah. Oh, I nearly had it right. I nearly had a fact right.
Yeah. So they started. They're a very old company that started in the 30s, and they moved on to electronics, very much like Nintendo. They made this console, the ColecoVision. But great thing about it is they brought out an adapter with it that you plug into the expansion port on the ColecoVision that allows you to play 2600 games. So
wow.
They released an adapter when it came out to use that allowed you to use its rivals' games on that unit. It's like PlayStation, Sony coming out with an Xbox adapter. Then obviously, that would never happen now because there'd be all kinds of trademarks and lawsuits. But they got away with it because the 2600 was made of just generic off-the-shelf electronics. There's no custom hardware in there. So Coleco just cobbled together the same off-the-shelf stuff, which happened to play 2600 games. And it's got all the buttons that's on the unit, on the 2600 unit, allows you to plug in the 2600 controllers. With the ColecoVision and that unit, which isn't, it's fairly cheap to get even now, 50 quid for a loose one for that unit. The ColecoVision, you may be looking at a bit more, probably over 100 quid for a loose one. So 150 quid probably will get you that unit, plug-in unit for VCS games, as well as the actual Coleco Vision. You've got yourself, 2600 and ColecoVision games. And ColecoVision games look really good. Even like if you're sort of used to, growing up with 8-bit sort of graphics of I would say it's kind of in between ZX Spectrum and NES is kind of how I'd describe it. It's very close to the SG-1000 and the MSX in terms of its hardware, weirdly enough.
You got to think about it that from the point of view, the Atari VCS came out in 1977 in the US, and then the ColecoVision came out basically 5 years later in 1982. Yeah. So that's almost like the sort of the difference between the PlayStation 1 and the PlayStation 2. So it's arguably a real sort of the next generation almost of consoles.
Yeah, it's because it's very quirky, and it's still kind of in that Wild West era of video game consoles where there wasn't really firm things established and like there is now, when there's really a routine established now that's been mature. In those days, it was still people just throwing whatever crap at the wall and seeing what sticks. With the Coleco Vision, you've got that adapter, and obviously there's even like recently in the last 10 years, someone brought out something called the Super Game Module, which adds more RAM to the ColecoVision, plugs into that same front port, adds more RAM, and allows a lot of like MSX ports of homebrew ports have come out, and even more games that utilize that extra RAM have come out. So there's the Super Game Module. It's only made in batches. It's quite hard to get hold of.
Yeah.
But so people are still actively developing hardware for it, which is crazy. And of those sort of, banner games that came out for those consoles in that era. So again, Space Invaders, Pitfall, Pac-Man, Frogger, River Raid, Dig Dug, Miss Pac-Man, Pitfall, all of those games. I mean, I think pretty much all of those have a ColecoVision version, and they're it's the best version for that era. Again, to relate that to perhaps a more familiar era, PS2, Xbox, GameCube. If there was a multi-platform game, the Xbox version would be the best. But you've got the advantage with the Coleco of almost like, and if the Xbox had a PS2 add-on, so you'd have the advantage of the best, multi-plat versions, as well as an add-on that allowed you to play all the other person's games. So in my opinion, I think the ColecoVision is the best console for that generation. But I also have a bit of a fascination with the Atari 5200, because what you've got with that, you've basically got, an Atari, a kind of an Atari ColecoVision, I guess, is kind of a funny way of putting it. Didn't get as many games as there were over 100 games came over for the Coleco. But it got about 70 or 80, might have been slightly less than that. We didn't get it in the UK, so you've got one big thing is you've got to import the bugger.
I think one thing I remember watching YouTube, or actually I watched 3 YouTube videos, and it was something like I watched the video of Donkey Kong on the Atari 2600. Yes. And then I watched the Donkey Kong on the 5200. I think it was Donkey Kong. And then I watched Donkey Kong on the 7800. So it was almost like, okay, on the 2600, it was just, squares, and you could sort of see a monkey at the top. and the gameplay was there, and then the 5200, it looked a little bit better, and then the 7800, that to me looked like the quality of a NES game without the sound and maybe not quite as good.
So like we're saying, the 5200, you're approaching, along with much like the Coleco, you're approaching that NES level of graphics. And again, a lot of those multi-plat games they re-released on the 5200, which is kind of the bone of contention for people, because they were like, well, I kind of want new stuff, right, with this new hardware, but you're just giving me better graphics of the Atari games. So I can understand why people would get annoyed. There's some design issues with it as well. The controllers break very easily. They have a very bizarre joystick, which is kind of very loose and analog. And
also the console. To be fair, I think it was bigger than the original Xbox One.
It's absolutely huge. Yeah,
it's huge.
It is huge. So getting one from the US, you're going to be paying a lot of money to ship it. Yeah,
exactly. But one thing I wanted to mention, you sort of touched upon it, how the ColecoVision, and well, actually two things I want to say. The ColecoVision's got a sort of new sort of upgrade that you can put in there to play, better games and things. But obviously in recent years, I'll say the last 10 years, a lot of people have been releasing games for the Atari VCS that have actually had additional chips within the cartridge. Yeah. So the idea is now the games are coming out that actually look leaps and bounds sort of better than what they would have done, back in, 1979. And I imagine programmers from back in 1979 would have looked at these games and gone, no. I know the Atari 2600, inside out. You can't do that. That's impossible. But of course, they've been these cartridges are sort of on steroids they've got additional RAM in, additional storage, and all different, tricks and things like that they've used to create those. But I think the next thing I wanted to mention was actually how good the programmers were back in the day to make engaging games, which generally, the Atari VCS, I'm sort of saying, it wasn't good. It didn't grab me like a lot of machines, but it sold 30 million units across the world. That's a huge amount. And that all comes down to, I think, the amazing programmers who had absolutely, the cartridge size was, 2K, and they actually made these amazing sort of engaging games that managed to make sort of 30 million people buy this console, and people are still talking about it on podcasts, 30 years later, 40 years later.
I have to listen to some of those podcasts. That sounds interesting.
It's
really. Definitely. I mean, also you mentioning the homebrew scene there, but like everyone knows about the awful sort of Atari version of Pac-Man. But I think not that long after they released Miss Pac-Man for the Atari 2600, which is like light years ahead and looks really good, very similar to the arcade. You still probably want to, and I'm going to keep talking about it, but grab a ColecoVision and grab that version of Pac-Man or Ms. Pac-Man. And again, what's great about the second gen of consoles, the homebrew scene is absolutely amazing. It's probably the best homebrew scene out of any generation, if we're not counting, obviously the ZX Spectrum and the Commodore and the Amiga are still getting games to this day. But for consoles, for dedicated consoles, you've got like even something like we talked about already, but Pac-Man. There's people weren't satisfied with the professional versions that came out in the 80s, so they've taken it upon themselves to make their own version. And on the ColecoVision, a company has brought out a Pac-Man collection cartridge where it's got these amazing looking versions of Pac-Man that are really close to the original arcade. And people I saw today there's an improved version of Donkey Kong for the Intellivision. Because obviously you were talking about how like Donkey Kong himself looks a bit like just some squares that animate slightly, but it looks a lot more like, the sprite looks awesome, like much closer to the actual Donkey Kong sprite. Mario looks better. There's an absolute ton of like homebrew games that push the hardware beyond anything that the original programmers would ever have imagined and are keeping these things fresh. And the same for the 2600. People have made versions of Super Mario Brothers. It's called Princess Rescue. Obviously, they can't just call it Super Mario Brothers. And it's amazing. It's scrolls. You've got all the different levels. You've got, The gameplay is nearly the same. It looks different. Yeah. You know, the resolution isn't as good and as what you would expect for a NES. It hasn't got the hardware to produce that exact look. But what they've done is amazing. And there's even a version of Sonic on the 2600 called Zippy the Porcupine.
Zippy the Porcupine.
Yeah, which is actually amazing as well, how they managed to get this thing to do that. So, yeah, I mean, people have also made better versions of like Zaxxon. Which kind of the Intellivision and the Atari kind of got screwed over with a version that isn't much like the actual original. Again, the ColecoVision got a really good version of Zaxxon, the sort of isometric shoot 'em up game. People have made a version
Halo.
of that. Yeah, there's a Halo as well, version of Halo. Not a first person shooter version.
No.
But kind of a cool kind of adventure, almost like RPG, overhead Zelda type version of Halo, which is absolutely amazing.
I think one thing to also mention is Activision, because obviously you know everyone associates Activision, they make Call of Duty and they own Blizzard, or they want all your money. But actually, sort of back in the day, I think they did some of the best games in the later years of the Atari 2600. Obviously, Pitfall is the one that sort of obviously comes to mind, but Can you think of any other of their Activision games?
Activision, I think, was Air Raid or
Air Raid,
sorry, not Air Raid, River Raid.
River Raid, yeah.
That was theirs. I mean, they were actually formed by people that used to work for Atari, who kind of got pissed off that they were treated quite badly. They left and just formed their own company, basically, and that became Activision. Yeah. Who we now know for this like an obscure series that they do. I think is it Call of Battlefield. I think it's called
Call of Battlefield.
Yeah,
Battlefield of Duty.
Battlefield.
Medal of Battlefield. That's it.
Yeah. Medal of Caulfield. But yeah, they did. Yeah, so obviously the big two is obviously Pitfall, and they also did. I mean, the River Raid, which is kind of a vertically scrolling shoot 'em up. Again, that's kind of, a little bit, there was some quite, we talk about how a lot of people think of Atari 2600 as just being, Pong or Space Invaders, but something like River Raid is basically a scrolling shoot 'em up with much deeper gameplay of, you got to manage your fuel supply. And it's kind of, and Pitfall, which is basically a platform game. So you've got some quite, what Hero is another really, an interesting platform game that goes a lot more beyond just a single screen waving a ship around. You're controlling a character through a maze effectively, and again a lot of these games have appeared on the other systems as well. The 5200, you get a better graphic version with maybe a bit of music, because funny thing I didn't mention about the 5200, that had a sound chip that was a good sound chip. Which is weird because the 7800 they didn't bother, including one at all. They just used the 2600 one. So you actually get some decent music in 5200 games. Again, the kind of Master System sounding, Coleco sounding stuff. But yeah, all these games.
That's the point, really. I couldn't talk about the 26. I really love the 2600 now. I'm coming right round. I want to go and buy one. But the 2600, if you look at the games that came out in 1977, and then you look at the ones that came out in 1983. Okay, yeah, they still don't look great, but actually there was so much more involved, and so much more was sort of going on with them. And the initial games were literally just a few different versions of Pong and things like that, and then the ones at the later stage there was just a hell of a lot more going on with them. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think now we've got to a point in time now where these sort of quick blast arcade style gameplay has kind of come back now as a mainstream thing. Not every game has to be, a 15 level platformer or an 8 hour or 100 hour RPG. Yeah. We've kind of got weaned back onto quick 5, 10, 15-minute blast or score attack games through mobile games, really, that suddenly these consoles, which we thought the gameplay was so archaic no one would ever want to go back to them, they've actually start appealing to people like me and you. It probably would have happened anyway because we're into like old retro stuff, but because for people like us that have jobs, and I can imagine for other people that have families and kids and just want to quickly jump on a video game and play it, these consoles now are perfect for that, because their whole libraries revolve around that. And you've got like, you know, with all these consoles, you've got these amazing homebrew games that are now coming out. So I just saw someone's made Gradius for the ColecoVision.
Oh my god!
Which is, you know, I think it needs that super game module to run, but also someone's making Castlevania for the ColecoVision.
Sometimes these people, they're actually legends for making, you know, to go back and making all these homebrew games, and then. Because I can't imagine, I can imagine the hours they're sitting there producing these games, and then they release them for people to download the ROMs or somehow get them onto a cartridge to get out there. And, you know, in the best will in the world, if you make a cracking homebrew game, and I don't think you can make too much sort of money out of it, but it's just, I think it's amazing that they'll enjoy the process of making the game, and, you know, because obviously we know so much more about sort of what can be done and things. And I'm actually thinking maybe I should sort of go and buy one of these sort of homebrew games that sort of people have done, and for the old consoles.
Looking at kind of what you know, some of the big guns that of the homebrew scene. I mean, you've got on like Atari Age, they do homebrews for basically all the second gen consoles. We've got a huge amount of Atari 2600 games. A lot of them are really awesome ports of, you know, NES games. I'm seeing one that's like it's a port of Balloon Fight. You know, things that perhaps, you know, no one would have dared try to make a port of back in the day, because they just wouldn't have, you know, also there wouldn't have been money in it. And also they might not have thought it wouldn't be able to handle it. But obviously the homebrew scene's like, hell yeah, let's have a go at it. So you've got these new gameplay experiences for these consoles. And, you know, people, you know, I would get a kick out of playing basically a NES game that I've played to death on an Atari 2600. God, they made a version of Flappy Bird for the 2600.
Oh, they did, didn't they? Yeah. So
games that, and a kid could play that now and it would be awesome. You know, they've made Gallagher for the 2600. So yeah, and then you've got another guys called ColecoVision games. And they do mainly.
What's his name?
Yeah, I've forgotten the guy.
Oh, Gamester 81.
Yeah, Gamester 81 has got a game on there. Yeah, his game. But yeah, they do a lot of ColecoVision games. I think ColecoVision is you know, really the homebrew community is enthused by it, because it's in that kind of sweet spot of it can kind of it's near enough to the NES that it's kind of less of a job perhaps to port a game to it than perhaps an Atari, where you need probably more in depth, you know, trying to really break it down to see how we can get it down to the lowest common denominator, and then maybe try and see what we can do on top of that. Whereas the Coleco, it's kind of fun to just verbatim take it and plop it on there and just see what it looks like.
Do you know what I'd like them to do for the ColecoVision? I think I like them to bring out sort of like a new version of the ColecoVision, maybe call it the Coleco Chameleon.
And then screw everybody over, yeah.
Do you think,
what happens, isn't it?
Do you think that's a good idea?
Well, a version of anything, really. There's the Atari VCS, which is going to be a disaster coming out.
Oh, my God. Oh, yeah.
I think, you know, there's like, I suppose it's going to be like run like modern games as well as old ones. It's going
I don't know. Will that ever come out? And
there's the Intellivision Amico, made by the guy that does the video games live, and Tommy Tallarico. Amazing name that dude has. By
Tommy Tallarico.
Yeah.
So that Coleco, back to that ColecoVision, Coleco Chameleon. I think it was called something like ACS or something before. Anyway. Yeah. I used to listen to a podcast, a video game podcast, and there was 3
video game podcasts.
Yeah.
Good.
And there was 3 guys on there, and one was British, and there's 2 American ones, and they're both called Mike. And so I always used to listen to this podcast. It was always quite good. And one of the guys was called Southern California Mike. And so I was listening. He always sounded like a nice guy. And then he was the one that was behind the ColecoVision Coleco Chameleon. So I thought, he's behind it. He was always a nice guy on that podcast. I always sort of liked him. I always enjoyed listening to it. I felt a bit let down, really, when he run off with everyone's money and stole the bloody put fake boxes of machines and had the games coming from a PC or whatever he did. I don't really know what he did. He might not have stolen any money. I think he just didn't do a great job, really.
People are listening to this podcast and feeling a little bit let down, I think. But hey, at least we're not taking my money off people yet. That's kind of what we do, isn't it? Put the podcast out, let people down.
I want to start up a Spectrum Chameleon.
Yeah.
And I'll do a podcast. I'll do a Kickstarter. So everyone will send you money. Everyone will send me money, and then I won't release anything.
Hope's Game Room will feature you in his Kickstamp scammers video.
Oh yeah, I'll be on that. You made it when you're on that show.
Exactly. Yeah.
We love that show, by the way. He does a great job for consumer help and things. But
check out the episode we had him on as well, not too long ago.
Yeah, it was a cracking episode.
Looking at ColecoVision, they've just done a version of Bomberman for the ColecoVision as well.
Have they?
Blaster, yeah. And there's like a Rick Dangerous type game for the ColecoVision. Sydney.
I love Rick Dangerous.
Yeah, there's now a Coleco version. So yeah, I guess we've come to near the end of the show now. But Stu, obviously, I'm kind of already enthused to grab myself one of these consoles. My personal opinion is the ColecoVision is the one to go.
Yeah,
to go with. You've got decent controls. You've got the best versions of all the multi-plat games. You've got an add-on that will get you the Atari games on it. Great homebrew scene. You're covered for the VCS homebrew scene as well. You can different controllers. That's my opinion of what you should go for from the second gen. That's what I'm going to try and grab.
I think I'm going to say two things. And for one, the first thing is get yourself a Vectrex. And imagine having that on the shelf, bringing it down. It's got the screen in, so just turn on and play. You don't have to worry about getting a fancy TV or an old TV to play it. And the second suggestion is actually get, I want to say 2600, but get yourself a 7800 because it's got the better controller on there. So that would be my advice, is to go down that route. And I think there's plenty of ways that you can mod it to at least have AV out. And you can also maybe, I don't know if you can get RGB. I'm making up things now.
I think you can.
I sound like Kieran making things up. I mentioned it. Anyway, so that's my advice: is go down the route of the 7800, which I know is the next generation.
You're going to get one. You're going to get one.
Ooh.
You're going to go down the right path of the Coleco.
I think in every show I promised to, I'll buy another console. So I've promised to get the Amiga 1200, and I want to get.
None of these consoles we talk about. I'm not even sure.
No, because I never had them back in the day. I've never wanted to get them because I never had them back in the day, and for me it feels, it's. I just didn't have them, or didn't really play them that often. And
I give a special shout out to the 5200 because it's obviously it gets crapped on because of the Angry Video Game Nerds video about it, but it's got really good games. If you can get around the controller issues that it has, it's actually got really good. It's got really good versions of the multiplats, and you can play VCS games on the 2-port version, which came out later, a slimmer version. There's an adapter for that, like the Coleco. There's an adapter. Trouble is, you have to be pretty like an idiot like me to actually want to get that because they never came out over here. You got to import it. So for me, ColecoVision, if you want to get the original hardware, special shout out to the 5200 because I think it's awesome and it gets crapped on too much. And for you, it is to maybe grab yourself a 7800 if you can, preferably modded in some way for a nice little video output. Or I think earlier you mentioned, of course, the flashbacks and all the various other modern versions of these things that have come out. If you just want to have something to pop in your HD TV, and that would be the way to go.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think that wraps it up, Stu. Where can you find us?
Well, first off, our website, consoleshock.net. You can find us on Facebook, Console Shock, or if you search Twitter, Console Shock. I think Console Shock UK in Twitter.
Indeed, we are.
and then we can find us on YouTube. Just search Console Shock, and then that's it really. I'm signing up on Instagram. But,
all the socials, we're on there, so search for us.
iTunes, Google, we're on the Googles, we're on Stitcher. I'm still trying to get us on Spotify, but actually I might check to see if we're on there now. So you can find us in plenty of different places, so please leave us a review on iTunes. People always say that. I
think we've got a couple of reviews on iTunes, so thanks Mum. And I think
one of them might have been me, I think.
It's just you writing on it, yeah. I'll take it.
Not a problem. Alright, so thank you very much. Please like, share, subscribe.
Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.
See you later.